Hello and welcome back to the Dugout. We just got done watching the film Set It Off. It's a couple days later from when we watched the film. We've done some research, let it settle in our membranes, and let's just say on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate the film?
Mm. 1 to 10, solid 8.5. I think the acting was really, really good. I think all of the all of the narrative decisions made also made sense to me. I liked the way that the stakes I like the way that the stakes were ratcheted up. And yeah, generally, I just found it to be a very moving film that was very clear in most ways about its perspective on gender, misogyny, misogynoir, labor exploitation, divisions within the black community, different perspectives on greed. And ultimately, I basically view it as a radical narrative because I do think it's speaking to certain structural things that are wrong with our community, and it does kind of Hollywoodize it. But mostly, I think it's earnest. But I also do also think about some of the things that you mentioned that we're going to mention later about some of the production elements that weren't so ideal for this film. But what would you say 1 to 10?
I- I'd have to put it at a 7, 7.5. Um, on a list of all the movies I've ever watched, it's definitely at like an 8.5 or a 9. Like it's one of the best films I've ever watched. That's for sure. It's in my top 5 for sure now. But there are still some things where I'm like, what are we doing here? Why do they have to go through all that? Other things I'm just like, it's putting it down in my overall scale.
And what are some of those things for you?
Why do three of them have to? Okay, spoiler warning, by the way, for this part. Go watch the movie. It's on Tubi for free. But why do three of them have to die at the end? That shit gets me. All the traumatic shit that they go through at the beginning, that like every character but one has to go through, Queen Latifah's character, because they're already down for the struggle. And I know how you talked about how like it makes sense thematically and narratively for their arc, but even the writer was like, all that extra shit in the beginning where they were going through all that trauma, that was the producers or other people being like, we need to see these women go through it because it makes no sense. Why would we just rob a bank? And I'm like, ugh, I get it, but also no.
Yeah, I guess my rebuttal to that is that I think about on a radical level or on a subversive action level, how seasoned were these girls at the work that they were doing? In terms of their level of skill, would the probability most likely be that most of them would get mowed down in exactly the way that they did in terms of the racism of the 90s at the time? So, in a way, in terms of it being contextual, in terms of it being about the 90s, in terms of it having numerous deaths by police, and also a sort of critique of police misconduct, lack of accountability, why would 3 out of 4 of them not die?
my I mean, I get it. I don't think it doesn't make sense. It's real as fuck, and it would just hit me, and I was like, ugh, okay, yes. But at the same time,
Rodney
like,
King.
wouldn't it have?
That girl,
Rodney King just happened, but I'm just
that black
like,
girl in the grocery store that got shot for fucking being accused of stealing by that Asian lady. You remember that too? Huh.
shit, I don't, because that shit happens every day.
Ayana, what's her name? There's so many. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying though, because I do think it is the question of what can and should radical narratives provide to audiences. And I do think there's a certain brutal honesty in having a believable outcome of most of these black people being offed by the state. But then I also think about, to your point about why can't we write stories that imagine a different possibility? Why can't we create mainstream narratives that provide an image of black people escaping off into the sunset freely, having rid themselves of the chains of the state? Because I also think about like a lot of the research I was doing when I was writing my book about in terms of like masculinity and Caribbean masculinity in Jamaican film. Most of the men die at the end, or they have to abandon their families, or they end up in prison. And so there is this trope, I think, on a certain level when we look at black subversive action in cinema and how it's seldom rewarded by peace or healing or actual resolution at the end. I mean, think of the first Black Panther movie. The black American gets fucking brutally killed at the end while he's being laid down, staring up at the stars, saying, I wish I could have seen this with my daddy. It's just like, so there is a kind of brutality, and
But
I
is
don't
that
know.
just laundering black rage and
Or,
suffering?
or is it just a not more nihilistic perspective?
When it's coming from certain industries, I can respect that, but at the same time, it's also playing into something that's a cash grab for so many people.
Well, part of it is a cash grab, the Black Death, the predictability of it.
I think so.
That
I think it
that
sells.
makes the movie. It makes the movie more marketable.
It definitely set it up for the second one, even though Jada Pinkett didn't want to do it.
Well, I also we'll talk about that more later. But I also thought when you said that, I was like, wouldn't it make more sense for them to not die so then the sequel could have more of them in it? Like maybe,
Black rage,
like
black
maybe-
love, black suffering and grief. It sells. We need it for ourselves. We need to see ourselves on screen doing that. This movie was revolutionary for so many different things that we get to see on screen. There's a perfect one thing I love is love is a very strong word, but there's so much black death at the hands of the state, and I love that these people's immediate reactions, or at least responses, if they want to organize around it, is they're not like, okay, well, let's call this industry or this organization, let's call this person on the block, I know them, we're going to rally set up, this person's going to get us a meeting with the chief of police, and we're really going to get some shit done. They already know. The person who was there when Frankie's little brother got shot was the same motherfucker that interrogated her like she was a fucking buffoon. So all I gotta say is they went straight to enacting capital terroristic behaviors right onto the industries that have been fucking them forever.
And the scene that drove that home even more, you remember when they're working their janitorial job and the one girl that needs a babysitter brings the baby in and then the baby gets into some like chemicals and then they're at the hospital getting the baby checked and CPS shows up and they tell her you need to find a fucking bank account or wherever the fuck to prove that you can take care of this kid because the state is getting this kid. And the mom's like, oh, you can't take my baby. And I can't remember which friend goes up to her, but the friend literally goes up to her. Latifah goes up to her while she's fucking boo-hooing and she's like, you know what you gotta fucking do, right?
Oh no, that was Frankie.
It was Frankie. And whoo, that part to me, I was like, oh, that. And that's also like, to me, it's like, that's a particular part of the Black experience moment. It's a particular economic experience moment. It's a particular kind of like gang shit moment where I'm like, to me, I'm like, this is the most reasonable thing in the world. I'm like, you know what you gotta do, right? And the mom did not fucking stutter because what pushed her to the point of radicalization, like it does for a lot of women, for a lot of people that become parents, it's having a child. It's having the potential for a legacy. And I also think this movie has a lot of interesting themes around legacy, the possibility of legacy, what legacy means. I mean, essentially, Jada Pinkett's character is the sole provider for her younger brother after they've been orphaned. And so there's that aspect of legacy that she's trying to hold on to. For the character that worked in the bank, her job represented a certain kind of legacy, stability. Queen Latifah, I think Jada Pinkett's character says to her, like, what about the future? Where are you going to be in 5 years? And she says, like, I don't really care about the next 5 years. And then that character assumption is challenged by what happens in Act 3 with Queen Latifah. And so I do think on a certain level, I do like that this movie is about blackness and subversion and the question of legacy, because I think all of those things are really relevant when you put them together, especially on a storytelling level.
Yeah. I wish we saw more of Tishan, Titi's, the mother's character. And that's something when I was doing more research that the writer was saying that they wrote in scenes of like the Tishan's mother taking care of the baby. And after Tishan died, the baby just waiting for Tishan to come home and stuff like that. Or like anything to do more with like, there was even, what were they called? You go back in time. Flashbacks. There's even
Time travel machine.
No, there were flashbacks that were kind of like them hanging out when they were younger to like establish their friendship and their relationship, which I think, especially that, like you said, that roof smoking scene, those are the girls. They are tight. That's a whole AG right there.
When watching Set It Off, as a black anarchist, as an organizer, as someone that has read about expropriation, let's just put it that way. There are a lot of things that I think is interesting about this films in terms of what it means on a radical political level, how it's representing a radical politic, and or even the question of whether or not this is a radical film at all. Because I'm also thinking of like some of the reading that we were doing during the Afro pessimism episode about how certain branches of anarchism always try to depict like urban riots as like a political rebellion, and so there also is one the question of whether or not this is a radical film, why we consider it radical. And for me as a black person at least, I like looking at it through the lens of radicalism because it is presenting these structural systems that these women are opposing on an individual level, but within this framework, this collective notion of a friendship. And so the idea of coming together, strategically going against these elements of the state, staking out a place, using expert knowledge if you're a former employee of an establishment, getting access to weapons. I mean, it's all kind of there. And so, in a sense, it's almost like a contemporary depiction of a not so far off black radical history, meaning like the 60s or the 70s, Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, XYZ. And I found it satisfying in the sense that even this movie also respected the emotional world of these characters. Like I think in a lot of radical narratives, they're dropped in as totally revolutionary formed, or we get to see like a revolutionary process, but
Would you say
it
at the
take.
beginning she ain't uppity? You didn't get to see her little uppity
Oh
phase?
yeah, Frankie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You didn't have to see
yeah,
that.
yeah. I was like, she could be me. I could be her. And so I like that it respects their interiority, and it respects their interiority to the point that it justifies it makes legible the what is considered to some people radical actions that they take by going through these banks and taking their money. And I also think it's radical in the sense of how it complexly views the experience of being black, of being a black woman, of being a black laborer with a boss that's like misogynistic, of all of the gender politics in the film. I think the film was very honest about the different ways that black men can do some damage to their community.
You said it before, and it was something I was making a key note of throughout the whole film, is that there is no good black man. There is no good man in this film.
Other than the bank
except for
teller.
one! And he's the love interest, and even he gets disregarded at the end because can't trust these niggas. But he did save the operation. So, good looking bank teller dude. Can't remember his name.
But I guess I'll raise the question to you. How do you feel about the radical politics presented in the film? What seemed needed on a storytelling level, but not a radical level, or vice versa?
I loved it because it just felt like some black shit. Like, it was just a movie. And it was just some black shit. Like, the way it opened up with that homie pulling up with the gun in the bank being like, hey, we gonna get you. Blah, blah, blah. And then Frankie like, hey, ain't that little bro? That's little bro.
You at the projects.
And little bro just like, give me all the fucking money. I was like, damn. Hey, they might be able to get up through, but this is definitely a catalyst moment. If there's anything I know about this movie, it's setting up a juxtaposition movement of like, here's how, or here's a status quo, or what we're gonna do, but definitely masculinized, definitely desperate, and without any grounding in certain aspects of community. And the rest of the film showed how these four women decided to create and deepen an internal community while expropriating from the oppressors. And I think that's really beautiful, especially after talking about like So Stray with all that stuff about like deepening the struggle while also, or deepening people's involvement in the struggle while also spreading out the power horizontally. Especially with the scene around the distribution of Frankie recognizing who they're mad at.
Mhm.
Of they were there was a scene where they were not gonna give Tishawn the money because Tishawn chickened out of the bank robbery. But they knew if anybody needed this money the most, it was Tishawn because they about to get their kid taken away. They have to go to court, show some paperwork that they got some money coming in.
Yeah, what do you think that moment was showing?
I mean, there's parts of me that want to say, oh, this is showing some sort of not everybody who works for something still deserves something in a collective project. But I don't think that was necessarily shown as much just because it wasn't like random people. Now, if they were like actually Robin Hooding it and giving it out to anybody, that would be a different thing versus. But it is like an internal aspect of how they care about this deep community or affinity group that they're creating. And it's, even though you weren't there the whole time, you were there for a part of it, and we know you need it.
Yeah.
And it's about the redistribution of all these funds, because this is more money than we all know what to fucking do with. That was before Queen Latifah went money hungry for a little bit, right? Had that little Dawn moment. Her and her little quiet side chick.
Yeah. I found the moment where Frankie got mad at TT, and then TT was like, just let's do it right now, beat my ass. And what I found beautiful about that scene is that I just think it showed, I mean, there were numerous moments of resolution in the film as well between the friends, which I think was also interesting. I mean, there's that moment between Frankie and TT, and I think that moment kind of represented them understanding kind of who the real enemy is, which I think is important. Like, even if you're in an affinity group with people, like, there can be different levels or forms of solidarity. And I think maybe between those two, they had known each other for years. But in this moment, she had to realize, like, oh, like, we're here because we need each other. Like, I can't just abandon you right now because you did something that doesn't suit how much we got to set it off. And then with Queen Latifah and Jada Pinkett, what was their resolution actually? Did they actually apologize to each other? Or
I mean, I think they had their resolution during that, like, Sopranos moment, and the, like, when they were doing that, like, Italian thing, where they were like, what about you? Do you think we need to deal with the business like it's the business, and then we deal with the friendship like it's the friendship? I don't know, some shit like that. Yeah, cut this out.
Oh my god. That's a hate crime if I ever seen
Italian.
one.
My sister's Italian.
Okay, that
Okay.
really gives you the pass.
Okay. So something I was getting into a little earlier with how this is a black film and how that's how I appreciate the radicalism or levels of radicalism that's shown in this film, especially because I don't think this writer itself doing the most radical films or is like known for that in their career. But that doesn't mean they're not like informed. They're not Eurocentrically radical.
Yeah.
It's what I will say.
Here's a way to flip maybe what I think you're saying. What about blackness makes us subversive to the state that you saw in this film?
So it was that. So yes, it's the subversion, and I think it spoke to a very specific kind of black, especially being placed in LA, where they specifically talked about, oh, we're not Beverly Hills, we're not Hollywood. Like, these are big places where capital and families that come from capital are residing. They're in the ghetto. And one thing that I loved while doing some research was reading a collection of essays called The Witch's Flight that talks a lot about the black femme intersections within the media analysis of this film, especially around the silent partner that Queen Latifah's character had, especially as a butch woman in the representation of creating this gender politic dynamic. And they talked a lot about how it is like a ghetto-centric radicalism. Something that is, I think, very important to get to the root of that word itself, of like, multiple different kinds of people have lived in ghettos. The ghetto, it just seems like a term to me that I grew up around that I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's where this is, or that's this block, or that's a couple houses ago. Oh yeah, I remember when I lived over there, or oh, I'm moving into the ghetto or other places. Like, it doesn't really mean as much to me as that, other than realizing it's an actual economic term that means that there are certain conditions that we're dealing with, and that the people who face those, their actual decision to make long-term moves for their survival are subversive for the state, whether that means doing more clandestine organizing around an unregulated market, aka drugs, or doing different kind of organizing around medical care. Like, A couple blocks in the ghetto always have the little neighborhood dispensary of Oxy and other things, but you know they're not trying to sell it. They're just trying to make sure you're right and you don't have to go pay no medical bill.
Yeah.
It's those kinds of things that exist in ghettos just because that's how social life maintains itself. And if we are forced to live in these sort of economic conditions, we will adapt to it.
To that, like, it's a ghetto-centric film, and I think it's also about viewing the ghetto and black people in the ghetto through the black gaze. Like, I think there are a lot of different social systems and elements that it showed, but it wasn't in a way that was documentarian or journalistic or like swooping in and weird lighting and they color graded it differently and there's water dripping from the pipes in the back. Like, it was a very humanizing depiction of the ghetto. Even like after the bank robbery, when the girls are like sitting out in like in the parking lot with all the cars, and then the other black dude comes by and he's like making fun of Queen Latifah, but then he's also like saying he's sorry to Frankie that she got put in that situation. And it showed social life in the ghetto in like a very casual and non-dangerous way, and the dangers that were present were the state. And I think, if I'm thinking back to my question about what about the black experience makes this movie subversive, it's the fact that black people that are under certain economic conditions, there's a complexity to us. There's the hoodlum, there's the person taking care of their brother, there's the mom, there's the girl that work at the bank, but they all on some level have a central distrust of the police. They have an understanding of what men are capable of, what men want to extract from them. And I think also, like, what also makes this movie radical is that it's a black female-led film. It's black women at the helm, and so can't even really think of many other films that show black women in this. I mean, I'm
This
thinking
film got rejected 3 times, the writer said, because the producers did not believe that anybody would want to watch 3 or 4 black women gun-toting doing some action shit. And that's a big thing I've heard before in the film industry of like producers have this imagery that men can't see themselves in women's position. So when women are the main characters, it makes the films unmarketable. First, that's the kind of patriarchy that's in these industries that are raining in all this capital to actually make these films go off the ground from somebody's idea to somebody's screen.
and I also think about what makes this film really black is like there's barely any white people in it. And if you grew up
They die.
yeah, and if you grew up in the hood, I mean, I think I've said it before in like a video or something, but I didn't know really a white person until I think I said in another episode of this. I didn't really know a white person until like somebody I'd see bored and my doctor. I mean, not until high school for real. I mean, and so I don't know. I feel like, and it's of course not every black experience in the hood or the ghetto is like that, but even that to me, I was just like, hey, I mean, I didn't even blink an eyelid at it. And I feel like certain white people would see the movie or maybe other people of color and they'd be like, where are people at? And I'm like, what neighborhood is it in? Or I don't know. So I also like aspect of it. Yeah, and it's like all of these women were on their own in a way, which I think is also telling. And I think is also a reason why they had to resort to such extreme measures because I don't know. I guess what I also liked about it is that they were all young, but we were also dropped into the end of most of their lives, whether or not they knew it. And so even in that sense, it's almost a commentary on blackness and how under these systems, we could be a number of steps away from being homeless or incarcerated or entangled with the state or XYZ.
Going to
And,
college.
and that is just literally a symptom of blackness under anti-blackness. Like that the kid, the brother. I mean, oh Lord, it's a
This film did it to me. Oh my god. I'll just say, like, there are so many things throughout this movie that I was like, oh, I was not ready for. But it was just like, I'm never ready for them. That's why it's almost like whenever this shit happens, police shootings, it's like, oh, we're out there having another reactive moment. We're never actually ready for dealing with the state on the terms that we need to actually liberate ourselves from these violences.
move through another topic. Another thing that I found interesting when I was like doing a little research into the movie is that Queen Latifah is one of the lead actresses in it. Well, her character is a lesbian. It was a really prominent role because there weren't many black lesbian roles in cinema at the time, especially like a mainstream action movie. And she even did one particular interview where she said this was one of the hardest roles she ever had because she specifically wanted to talk to her family members, especially her younger family members who might not understand, who would be going to school and might deal with other people's negative interpretations or ideas about her playing a queer character. And one, I think that's interesting, and it also says a lot about the 90s and how the 90s isn't that far away from the 80s and the AIDS crisis, and how much of the AIDS crisis was depicted or seen through the lens of like black suffering and also the war on drugs. And so I think all of that is complicated and interesting, but what I think is even more complicated and interesting is that after this film, it's said in numerous interviews, including a BuzzFeed piece, that Queen Latifah said, and here's a quote: "I put a death clause in my contract right after the movie." She told Myers at the time, "I was like, wait a minute, I'm starting to die too good in these movies, and if I die, I can't be in a sequel," which I think is a funny way to put it. But if we're looking at it from an Afro-pessimist logic, we're born dead. The womb is the fucking pit of the slave ship. And so what does it mean to be born into this world, to be hired to depict blackness, and then to have the most likely outcome that even in this illusory world where anything is possible and we can imagine, that you will most likely die? And this is also maybe to your point about why
we can't have these niggas keep dying, because that is the ontological point of blackness for these people and what we're selling to them in the imaginary through these films.
it's intense and moving and interesting to hear of a black actor putting this in their contract, because one, I don't know much about Hollywood. I also didn't, I mean, I know that you can kind of say no, yes, blah blah blah, but it's just wild. I'm like, how many movies did she die in? And I'm thinking like one of my favorite Queen Latifah movies is The Last Holiday, and she's basically supposed to be dying of cancer or a tumor, and she doesn't die. So I'm like, whoa, it impacted my life. That bad movie that she was in with Ludacris on Netflix, where she plays a mom and they're trying to protect their kids, and then she ends up running through the desert and almost getting shot and killed. She survives.
Queen Latifah is out now.
Yeah.
At that point when she was telling her siblings or nieces and cousins, like, people may view me a certain kind of way, I wonder how much, like, as a queer person trying to be public and toting this line of in-betweenness, what they were, like, were they feeling that out for themselves at that time? Or were they being like, I already know that I wouldn't be where I'm at, so I need y'all to recognize that other people are bigotred?
What are you saying?
I just realized I said that and, like, I skipped a couple
I'm
words.
also like, it seems like she came out through acting, or I mean, I actually don't know the timeline of her coming out, but I'm like, it seems kind of weird and intense that you would maybe not be out in a certain way to people in your life, but then you have to play a character and sort of have to come out because you're playing the character. So it's kind of like
Gay for pay is such a big thing,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Even what we're talking about in Bridgerton, we got some straight for pay now.
If I'm also thinking of other aspects of this film that I really, really like, well, one aspect of it that I don't love, if we're talking about like a radical representation or a cinematic representation of radical action, all the bank robbery shit they do in the first scene, the guy that's robbing the bank, why would you rob the bank of someone that you know can identify you, and you're not also wearing a mask? And I get it that they were going to the counter and then they wanted the, but it just wasn't like, you're gonna be identified. Like if you're gonna pull out a gun in public, you're gonna be identified. So there, that was done. And then women, the four friends. It does make sense that they like wore sunglasses and a wig and like similar outfits, but they also are all very distinctly different sizes. And they, to me, I don't know. I just think since the cops suspected them, it would have made more sense for the cops to just kind of but then also it does make sense. Like the movie, this is what I mean when I say the movie was setting certain things up storytelling wise. Like there were just a lot of things in the story that looking back at it, certain things were procrastinating. Cause I'm like, okay, like if I were them and I were to rob a bank in a poorly done costume, I would have gotten the money and then left town right away. But then that one girl wanted her kid back. And then they got robbed by their boss. And then they had to go after more banks. And at that point, I'm kind of like, then that really big robbery just fucked them because they barely even made it out. I don't know. So it's interesting because I do wonder, like, if they had done things a little smarter, would they have not ended up in the dire situation that last bank robbery put them in? Even in terms of like where they were hiding the money, they were like, we all need to hide all our money in the same place, and they hid it in a wall vent in their fucking job. I'm like, hide it in a fucking ditch in the middle of fucking nowhere, or I don't know, in a book. Put it in the Bible in your house. You know when you live with a Christian, like I'm just like it's just
They're trying to keep it away from. They're trying to keep it away from
that's
the state, so nowhere in their house.
It's their place of employment.
I know. The place of employment part is bad. It's bad.
I mean,
but that way
the
there
house
is
suggestion
liability
isn't the
that it
best
could
idea,
be
but I'm
anybody.
like, the main criticism is like, why put it in your place of employment?
Yeah, no, that is sus because it's not like there's that many other cleaners. That was the crazy part, is that when they were every time we saw Lutheran Cleaning Company, it was just those 4 women. And when we saw the new company taking over, it was like 16 people cleaning that house. And I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Well, yeah.
So-
I guess I'm speaking on like what are some of the radical or like mistakes they made in the film, and I talked about like them not masking up in the beginning, and also like the cops when they shot the brother. I'm like, you're shooting people of 2 different skin tones. That was also the other thing. I'm like, this is racism pure and on display. So the cops also fucked up. Yeah, I feel like the cops could have also been smarter and learned like especially the white cop. I'm like, play the game. Like, if you're going to your black cop and being like, we need to go after these black people more, like he maybe should have said it a little.
Okay, so here's what I want to bring up. How do we feel right now about the black cop representation in the film?
Well, you have way more to say about that than I do.
Trading, class trading, pig in the silk press.
Pig with a silk press. We should call this episode Pig with a Silk Press.
Pig with a silk press, set it off! Yes! No, but I mean, so you brought it up when you were like, this white cop went up to the black cop and was like, we need to find. If you're not watching the video of this episode and just listening, I'm sorry. So this white cop ran up to the black cop and was like,
During what scene?
I don't even fucking remember.
Yeah, it's the scene when they're finding out that the brother was killed. Is that the scene you're referencing?
No.
Are you talking about the first scene when the girl is being questioned after the bank robbery and she goes up to the black cop and is like,
No, it's just the white cop and the black cop. The black dude.
and what happened in the scene?
Okay, so the white dude runs up to the cop in the scene and is like, we need to go after these people. I think we just killed her brother and I think we need to do this. And then the black cop was like, are you fucking kidding me? You want to, after we just killed this person's brother, you want to harass them and then arrest them. Yes, we're talking about the same scene.
So you're talking about the scene where essentially the women have robbed one bank already, and the white cop who killed Jada Pinkett's brother is trying to say to his superior...
He didn't fire a shot.
Who's trying to say to his superior, I think the sister of this slain black kid and her friends are robbing all these banks. And the black cops is like, the headlines are fucking horrible right now. We're being investigated by everybody, and you want to throw more in the news, throw more mud on it. So that's the scene you're referencing. That's around Act 3.
Okay, so that's what I'm referencing. And I remember at the time you were like, "Kid," you were like, "That's him.
Oh,
it's a good dude." And I'm like,
"That's a good cop."
And I was like, "That's just a basic ass pig." Because that's what any pig would say, whether or not he was white or anybody.
He's worried about PR. He's not actually worried about these black people's lives.
Exactly. That's the only thing I can think about. And then there was like, you did mention the silk press, and I don't know if that's exactly what this one female pig had in the movie, but they were there for the interrogation scene. They were basically like the right-hand man for this white pig. And they were going hard trying to find this black expropriators. I'm just saying there's some class trading, race trading, silk press having, fucking bad teeth, no car, no husband, fucking stinky ass, fucking.
Oh my God.
I don't know.
Okay, on to another note.
I
um,
didn't mean to bring
I
it
don't know the way you
there.
talk about her. I'm like, oh Lord,
Nothing about her
we gotta, we
husband.
gotta, we gotta stay in the podcast category we're in. Black Cop was there because I think she kind of showed a certain spectrum of cop, which I think is good.
She didn't even get her water.
Yeah, she didn't
Sister.
even get her water sister. Okay, I guess another question I have is what do you think logistically about their escape? So in the last bank robbery, they have to what happens in that one? Oh yeah. They one of the girls is like told to get more money, get more money. They're trying to escape. Three of them are trying to escape. TT the mom gets shot. They get taken to the car. Tears, tears, tears. They're trying to get out, get to another car fast enough. The mom dies. There's three of them left. They're trying to escape. Helicopter, helicopter. Boo, woo, 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 woo. They end up in a tunnel. Queen Latifah's like, get out of the fucking car, hide along the tunnel walls. I'm gonna drive this way. They're gonna come out. They're gonna follow me. You go the other way. Keep the money. They separate, and then the two girls that are left, I don't know. So basically, I don't know. I think with the escape, I don't know enough about LA, but I guess I can think that LA is a very car city. It's very traffic heavy. So I am like,
Once you get the helicopter,
I don't know. Yeah, I'm like, this is
away.
a. Oh, yeah. And then Queen Latifah, honestly, she went out like a G. She went out like an absolute fucking G on live TV, having the niggas watch, and the niggas. And the niggas were like, when you got the niggas watching on TV and they're like, damn, they never do her like that. Like, they really respect her. And so that scene was brutal, but I was also like, I don't know. It also was like a weird moment of martyrdom that I think is familiar for black people. And so it was interesting seeing it on screen in a way that it was horrible, but I was like, okay, go ahead. It's like the if we must die.
Yeah, I get the if we must die, and this is something I feel like maybe it's prevalent in a lot of like really revolutionary circles, maybe insurrectionary circles. And if this is something that is relatable, it's something to recognize this sort of martyrdom that does mean we will have a grand gesture that will totalize everything bad in my life. And I feel like that's the kind of masculinizing of butchness that they gave this character. That they were able to give up their life in a moment for their friends and for their community, even though they fucked them over in ways that maybe weren't completely reconciled, but they were attempting to. And in this last job, they were attempting to reconcile it. This sort of martyrdom that may be masculinized or may just be lionized is the suicide by cop kind of mentality that I think even if you're going underground and doing all this hard ass shit, you can survive that. And you don't need to suicide by cop. I don't think it needed to happen, but I do think that it's some shit that was like relatable and a person that I think I would like see some friends or myself in ways, but especially in the little fake out they did with the cops where they skirted off and they're like, "Oh, she's dead, we killed him," and she comes out busting just to kill a couple cops. That's some tactical shit. If we gonna get these cops out no matter what, and if it comes to that, it comes to that. And it was like honestly not the worst example of that, but it was a moment where I was like, it didn't have to be that real. Like the movie it had too many real black ass ghetto ass moments where I was like, of course. Like, why did I expect us to survive any longer?
Yeah. And I think the Queen Latifah moment is it could be read in a lot of different ways. I think could very easily be read as a very huge expression of love for the people around you. Like out of all of them, she was the most material. She was the most materialist. Like the money was about like cloud and visibility for her, but also in a way where it's like she kind of loves her community so much that that mattered, but it also drove her to like be fucking rude to her friends, etc. And so to say, keep it, I'm gonna handle this shit, get the fuck out of here. To me, I'm like, that's what makes it so black and ghetto, and like that's what also makes it beautiful because I do feel like there's certain parts of the hood where even some of the people that might be the most greedy, grungy people you know, they do have people in their lives that they would give it all up for. Like, that's their people. They won't cross that line with them, or they might cross the line, but when it really needs to happen, it will happen. But I also think, to your point, there is the aspect of it. I'm very much thinking of like Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton. That's basically his political text slash memoir, where he talks about this notion of revolutionary suicide, which is to live a dignified life under capitalism, colonization, all of these forces of evil, racism, anti-blackness, to live a dignified life under that, you will eventually have to confront the state. And that confrontation can or most likely will lead to your death, your suffering, your revolutionary suicide.
It is true that many of our leaders have been confined in the concentration camps here in America. I know that the Black Panther Party will prevail. It's the vanguard of the people's struggle, and that while leaders are put into prison, new leaders are born, new leaders are made.
And there's a lot of criticisms of this framework. I think it also is something that I think about and write through a lot. Like, I've written about it in terms of Huey P. Newton and a local activist in Ohio, Marshawn McCarroll, who passed away by suicide on the Columbus State House steps, and was a longtime organizer, intense organizer. And so I think, in a way, there is that aspect of this movie of, like, it is heroic what Queen Latifah does, but it also does kind of speak to, yeah, maybe there is a demand that you were kind of saying, where it's like, why can't we survive? Why can't that be imagined? And I also think that maybe is like a more revolutionary responsibility, or more radical responsibility as a storyteller, because I think when regular people tell stories, they might think, what is the most likely outcome? But a more radical perspective is like, how can I write something that's believable and also people survive? Like,
Is
how
that
about that?
like, why does that have to be utopia?
I don't think it is. I just think it is it's a few steps in forward in terms of consciousness storytelling. Like, I think this film was trying to be conscious within its own context, but a further consciousness, maybe one that we're trying to imagine, which may be further than what is offered to us. Because I mean, think about Queen and Slim.
I mean, how do you place this in a history of blaxploitation films that this movie claimed to be in direct lineage of, in their writing style in certain themes?
What do you mean?
I mean, the writer just said that it was like, when they were writing it, there were certain things around blaxploitation films that they were trying to embody. And what kind of through lines do you see through that? Because I don't have a lot of big media lens where I've seen a lot of movies and other things, but I know you have, and especially through things that have been through the blaxploitation period.
I mean, one, I'd want to also read that and be like, "Oh, is that what this nigga said?" Because I'm like, that sounds kind of weird to me. There is sexual exploitation in the film, which is a core trope and element of blaxploitation. There is depictions of the state, misconduct, police misconduct, them doing things wrong, seeing their line of logic, it being a sort of plot line in the film. And I also don't think these black characters are perfect as well. But also, all of those things, I'm like, is that blaxploitation, or is that just like a slightly more complex black story? Because I mean, I don't necessarily view this film as exploiting the black experience. I view it as a empathetic depiction of what four black women turn to when these systems are against them.
What do you think black people got from blaxploitation films that we've learned to polish and make our own?
Well, okay. I think I'm hearing your question, but I think to understand it even more, I think we'd first have to talk about the spectrum of what blaxploitation films are. I mean, there is a range. There's blaxploitation films made by black people, blaxploitation films made by white people, in terms of all the different decades that blaxploitation as a genre has existed. And then there's blaxploitation pre-internet age, post-internet age. We can look at Tyler Perry, we can look at Tubi, we can look at Pluto. And so I think your question is both interesting, confusing, and compelling to me, because I do think on a certain level, I don't know. I mean, we could take it even further. The 90s is considered a golden age of black media and cinema. There were shows like Living Single, Martin. I can't even list a bunch of others, but there was so much black media that was speaking towards a deeper complexity. But on certain levels, we can look back and have a sort of meta modernist approach to it, like saying like, oh, the gender politics were archaic or XYZ, or they had too many wigs or perms or whatever. And so I think on that level, there is this kind of almost expansion and moving beyond the term of blaxploitation in terms of like how I think we can view blaxploitation as something that black people participated in, and then maybe we did make it our own in certain ways in terms of like indie black media and black cinema. We can also look at like how did hip hop and rap influence how cinema like was depicted and how certain kinds of blackness were more expected. And so I think there's a lot of complicated questions that are entangled in what I think you're asking, and I think set it off as kind of like in the middle of a lot of different formations of that, because it kind of is straddling the line between like what was maybe the black cinema of the 80s, which I don't necessarily know as much about, and I think that's kind of like when blaxploitation was maybe kind of tapering off in like the most egregious way, if you want to say it. But then I'm also like, I think about like Bones. That was a movie I loved when I was a kid, and that's Snoop Dogg. And if I'm really thinking about that, I mean, that was more of a horror movie, and I would kind of put it in the blaxploitation era. And then it's also like I'd put Tyler Perry, but then even Tyler Perry, like his stuff is just
Okay.
I don't
I have a
know.
question. Where do you... This is getting a little off topic. Where do you put Shonda Rhimes in the blaxploitation category?
Don't even fucking say her name in this conversation. That's where I put her.
Okay, my bad. Where do you put Shondaland?
What the fuck are you talking? You gotta be more specific, because you have.
I'm talking about
12 different-
Scandal.
you
I'm
12
talking
different-
about Grey's Anatomy. Like, that's not some black shit until there is some black characters, and the way they're introduced and the way they have to grow. Like, they go through some shit like. They go through some shit like any other character in Grey's Anatomy does.
Grey's Anatomy.
Her sister, the medical professor that
Miranda Bailey.
okay, so there's Miranda Bailey, and then there's that nigga that's the head of the hospital eventually, and then all these people who just like they do the most work. They're all like semi-magical Negroes in a way, but they're breaking tropes, and I don't want to.
I think you're wrong. Magical Negroes. I
think they're yeah, because like they're there when people need something, because they're either in a teacher or they're in an admin position, but they're supposed to subvert those roles by being the best that anyone could be for that, and they're all for the main protagonist that is a bunch of white people going through a hard structure.
Breaking stereotypes and having colorblind casting and offering complex depictions of someone's backstory, life, gender trauma, sexuality, numerous layered depictions of what blackness is. How's that blaxploitation?
So that's why I'm saying putting them in the grade of it, because I think all these movies that we're talking about in the 90s that are semi-radical, that are leaning or taking from these blaxploitation films, are a part of black culture and media evolution in a way that there's a sect of blackness that took these blaxploitation films and owned them, but decided that the things that were negative about them either weren't so negative or weren't so relevant. And then we continued to create genres and influence genres around it. A little bit, because if you look at, there's so many things like, I mean, this is something we could get into eventually that we're going to get into in our more black media series, or talks around this and like black media. When we're talking with with Insecure, is whenever I watch a recap of Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, Insecure, I'm watching a recap, I'm like, this is the most ghetto shit. Like, I feel like I'm watching some Days of Our Lives, or like some like, what are they called? Some like novella shit, or like just some ghetto shit. And I'm just like, yes, like, but it's real. Like, this is just real life, all capped into one.
I disagree with your analysis of Shonda Rhimes. One, I mean, maybe this is a false accusation. I don't think you've watched her stuff as much as I have. Two, I think I emotionally connect to it way more. And I will say, in terms of watching like Shonda's like overall arc of shows, even from like, she wrote Crossroads.
I don't even know what that
The
is.
movie with Britney Spears, Zoe Saldana. They
All
go
I've
on
seen
their
is Grey's
childhood
Anatomy and
friends.
Scandal.
They go on a road trip. And it's a diverse film, and like Zoe Saldana in it, but her race isn't like at the forefront. And so I think on one level, race is an aspect of what Shonda Rhimes is dealing with in her storytelling, but I don't think she puts it at the forefront in the way that most blaxploitation media does. I think that's one thing. I do think some of her black characters fall into certain tropes or certain ways of colorblind casting or addressing race. Might not be as satisfying to like mainstream or certain kinds of black audiences. But I do think a part of her appeal is that she doesn't exploit blackness in the ways that Tyler Perry or other people out there, like even Spike Lee or some other people are fucking out there. I'm like, even we can talk about Spike Lee. I mean, I don't know. Let's talk about the black man. I'm like,
I'm interested more in like, the contrast.
yeah. And so
versus other people.
yeah, and I think Shonda, she's working more towards like, I mean, she's working more towards like definitely like a sort of media universe, and she's also working more towards like depictions of people across diverse backgrounds, but it's not necessarily mainly tied to their ethnicity or their race, and which to me is like very anti-blaxploitation. And so to me, I think your analysis, I get what you're saying, but I also think we're kind of muddying the waters of what blaxploitation is. Like,
Oh yeah, I don't. For the record, I don't know the actual definition of blaxploitation.
have you seen Black Gestapo?
Nope.
Ganja and Hess?
Nope. This is what I'm saying. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying, and your analysis is what I'm like, ooh, okay, yes, and I'm not even trying to say Shonda's all of that, and maybe I was when the way I question it, because
Shonda! Free
okay,
Shonda!
I'm not gonna go that far, because a nigga's still in the industry.
She's a billionaire. Free,
Exactly.
Free Shonda.
In this episode, we have talked through, I think, everything we
50
want
minutes
to.
in.
I know, I was like, should we do this as a two-parter? But no, this should definitely be
We
one.
can do whatever the hell we want. I feel like it'd be fun for it to be two-parter. We could have like an intro and outro where it's like we could interview the actors in the show and splice together their responses.
No. Which one of these actors? Tashawn? I haven't seen Tashawn in something recently. Who?
No. Are you kidding me? She's in Diary of a Mad Black Woman, Tyler Perry's first.
Okay, I'm
big
sorry, y'all.
mainstream- She's in Diary of a Mad Black Woman.
You said Tyler Perry's first.
His first big mainstream movie, Diary of a Mad Black Woman.
So when was that?
Shit, that was probably when I was 10, so it was probably like 2006 or something, 2005, 6. Like Diary of a Mad Black Woman. Basically,
What are we talking about?
Diary of a Mad Black Woman is Tyler Perry's first big mainstream movie. It's basically about a girl in an abusive marriage. I'm not laughing, but it's like, if you talk about fucking blaxploitation, talk about Tyler Perry. She's in an abusive marriage to a black man. He ends up in a car accident after she finds out that he's sleeping with a white woman is going to leave her. She's left to take care of him. She flies off the fucking handle, throws him into a bathtub, berates him, ends up leaving him, gets her a light-skinned dude to fall in love with her, and then she rides off into the sunset after forgiving her ex.
Actually, maybe I've seen this.
So she actually, I think it's the same act. Yeah, it's the same actress because she has that salad eating video that people love where she's chowing on the salad and she's digging into this man. Yeah, it's honestly an iconic feminist film, low key.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we should end this episode.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. I mean, I want to rephrase my intent with my questioning in case it's construed as a Shonda newbie.
you had a Shonda assassination attempt.
I did not. I had a question, and you assassinated me for the attempt, I guess.
Keep Shonda's name out of your fucking mouth. That's the name of this episode. No, I'm joking.
I mean, my main question was putting Shonda in that sort of lineage.
She's
or not lineage, or putting it in.
No, we did the video.